there's this a van. We did the absolute worst job ever. And on that day, we were working out of a van, and we put Bonaventure Respond's shirt got thrown up. It was filthy dirty, just disgustingly dirty. And I threw it up on the van. And on the other side of the van was a hands-on shirt. And the two absolutely filthy shirts were sitting there perfectly on the St. Bonaventure van. And that, to me, was going to be the introduction to this. We are very fortunate to have David here today. David Campbell started hands-on, the hands-on disaster response after the tsunami that hit Southeast Asia. He then went to Biloxi, started it there, and the rest is largely history that is still playing out in front of us. Just a great, great guy. I can't say enough about him. If you want to think about role models, here we have him. Here's the guy that, and I almost hate to say this with him sitting here, but when virtually every single time Bonaventure Responds decides to launch a new project or not launch a new project, I think, what would hands-on do, and would they do it? If the answer is no, I really have to think long and hard if we want to do it, because they are that much. Everything we do is emulated, copied off of them. So without further ado, I will give you David Campbell, who I'm positive will keep you entertained. He's very, very good.
Get me on my first slide.
Get you on your first slide, and okay. Let's do full screen. There we go.
Hi. Thanks. My major interest is trying to give you what you want, so I'll try to run sort of quickly through. Yeah, run quickly through and tell me how to dance it.
Just page
okay.
down.
Got it. I'll try to run, frankly, sort of quickly through the hands-on story about how we came about, but I'm more interested in getting through it so I can help you guys think about what you're interested in and where you go for information, how you take the experience you're going to have through Bonaventure Responds and others in terms of how you decide to live your life, how you can do that more effectively. But frankly, those things are of greater interest to me. My story is, of course, I had a brilliant start. I went to Niagara University. Okay, all right, that's just a kitchen cut. Went from Niagara to work for IBM, worked for IBM for half a dozen years in Buffalo. Was involved with a group of people starting a company there called Computer Task Group. Spent 25 years doing that. Went to Boston in the mid-90s to become president of a company there. Long short, I was having lunch on December 28, 2004 with a friend, and I still had basically a business life. And my friend said to me that 10 days earlier he had been in Phuket, Thailand, when the tsunami, having lunch. And 10 days later we were having lunch in Boston. 2 days earlier the tsunami had hit. And when the tsunami hit, everyone in the place he had been only 10 days earlier had been killed. This is what the tsunami looked like when it came on shore. It's hard to imagine devastation, but the tsunami was a 60-foot high wave. People call it a wave, but it was a wave that was 2 miles long. So think of a block of water 60 feet high, 2 miles long, with the power coming as it came ashore in Thailand. Because of my, the tsunami was triggered by the largest earthquake that had happened in the world in 40 years. This earthquake happened and therefore had an impact in Sri Lanka and Indonesia and Thailand, just because of my coincidence of talking with this guy. I had a reason to be in Europe 2 weeks later, and so as I went to check out his story, I found that the hotel that he had been at was destroyed, but others were alive, had internet access, and on the basis of if you're there with internet access, you could do something different, I decided to go alone to Thailand. The connection to you is that the world is changing dramatically. For example, social networks and Facebook and texting exist today. They didn't exist 10 years ago. When I was looking at the tsunami situation, I said, I understand the internet. People doing disaster response may not. I can combine something I know that they may not and create a new kind of solution. And your advantage is that you will be the ones who really understand some tool sets. You can apply those to new problems and create new solutions. And I found that was the theme, I guess, that took me to Thailand. These are pictures taken when the tsunami hit the particular village of Bang Tao. We went to, and you can imagine that people talked about the destruction by the tsunami driving vehicles through buildings and therefore creating untold levels of destruction. destruction was done just by the wave action hitting. And I'll move sort of quickly through Thailand. This was an example of being on the scene and finding fishermen who lost their boats and therefore their ability to earn an income. And one of the disaster response projects we did in Thailand was to get them their boats back because that gave them their pride back. If you think about social activity, if you're considering a degree in social work, giving someone after a disaster the pride of having their job back is a kind of economic development that we think is an important part of disaster response. And so we did that. Thailand was the first time this model was created. A lot of us showed up. It was the worst disaster that had hit the world in 40 years, and so people wanted to help. The phrase we use is spontaneous volunteers, people who wanted to help but weren't registered or pre-trained. And what we tried to invent in Thailand was a model that said we can take the phrase of spontaneous volunteers and organize them in a way to do effective work. It's a lot of what those of you who participate in Bonner Responds are going on the faith that good-meaning people, open-minded, willing to do whatever's needed, can have a tremendous impact on a community. And that's what we found after our several months in Thailand, was that this pulled together a random group of people. I sort of only wear a beard when I'm at a project, so I'm the old guy with the gray hair in the upper left corner. And what I found, as you may have found in the Bonner Responds project, is that directly engaged with people who have needs is a tremendously satisfying thing. And as I talk about hands-on, my message is we do three things. We physically fix things like supply a boat, repair a house, fix a school. We send a psychological message to the people that are there that someone outside knows you had a loss and cares enough to come and help. And we have a psychological benefit to the people doing it, that they're directly engaged in helping someone. And all three of those things I think are important. Several of us who've been involved in Thailand stayed in contact. In 8 months after the tsunami happened, Katrina hit the United States, the worst natural disaster to hit the United States. And just to put it in some perspective, in terms of numbers of homes destroyed, the worst prior hurricane in American history in 1992 had been Hugo, which destroyed 28,000 homes. Katrina destroyed 350,000 homes. So the total different order of magnitude in the impact on society. Over that weekend of Katrina, we decided to launch our organization. In Thailand, it had been simply ad hoc, a bunch of people working together. We had taken the name Hands-On Thailand because we were doing brilliantly hands-on work in Thailand. So obviously we didn't spend a lot of money on branding, but we did check to make sure the website was available, because that was always key to us, because our people found us over the website. When we came back, we searched, took on the name Hands-On Worldwide, and launched the U.S. project as Hands-On USA. We hit Biloxi, Mississippi first week in September. Many of you were there. You know what Biloxi looked like, but this was a major church building on the Gulf Coast. This was a team actually from Alfred State that was with us in the first few weeks. This was a bulldozer that was given to us by a donation from Mark IV up in Buffalo, who sent us $25,000, and the next week we sent him a picture back saying, here's your donation at work, it's making our teams more productive. And I learned the benefit of feedback to donors, where they make a gift and quickly someone says, we're more productive because of what you did last week. That has a high impact. It's why if Jim asks you when you're volunteering, would you take a minute and send an email back to a donor saying, I'm here because you gave money, that has a tremendous benefit and impact in how we try to fund these new models we're trying to invent. What we do is, you guys know, clear debris, cut down trees that have fallen through houses, tarp roofs. These are all the activities. This is a guy by the name of Darius, who some of you may know. He's on the board of Bonner Responds. He was with us in Thailand. He was the guy who showed up on the thought. Darius is a web development guy, and he thought he could keep his income going while he was in Thailand by doing some contract programming at night, work during the day. It's sort of hard, as those of you who've been in a disaster area know, it's pretty hard to blend those two things because you get absorbed. Darius was the first guy that I had managed the deal with that was, you can go out and clear rubble during the day, but you got to do software development for me at night. I'll make you a deal. And I've had to do the same deal with finance guys and lawyers and architects. I need you to do your professional work for some part of what we need to get done. You can go do debris some part of the day, but you got to give me some professional time. And so Darius helped build a website for us in Thailand, and when we chose to go down to Biloxi, the weekend when I was setting up the incorporation and the bank account, he was setting up the website. One of Darius's ideas that you may have heard about in Biloxi was, let's put up a new street sign system. After Katrina, all the street signs were destroyed in every community. We were trying to get work done. It wasn't possible. We went to the mayor and said, okay, if we put up a new street sign system. It sounds simple, but it was a very clever idea. It's the kind of thing a bunch of volunteers can sit down with a city map, figure out you got 4 Oak Streets, 12 Hemlocks, 17 Mains, and whatever, make the signs, go out with a staple gun, and 3 days later you're a hero because you've replaced the street sign. Of course, every one of them has a hands-on logo on the end of the street sign. As far as I know, they're still in Biloxi. They were there the last time I was there. They had survived 3 years. They may be there forever. Maybe the stimulus bill will replace them. This was our probably major management innovation, for those of you, again, who've been on Bono Response trip or not. What I found in Thailand is as the group grew from 12 to 30 to 80, we had sort of the normal management challenges that come up. How did we decide to do this project versus that one? Who decided where to buy the supplies? Who's going to decide whether we have pizza or not? And we ended up having an all-hands meeting basically to break down some communication issues in Thailand, such that we decided when we went to Biloxi that we would start the concept of a daily all-hands meeting. And that is, at the end of every day, if you haven't been with us, this is the building that you guys stayed at in Biloxi with Bono Responds that we created with Hands On. Yes, we do encourage beer with dinner. So what we decided in this building is that we will, at the end of every day, have an all-hands meeting. It really has several components. New people introduce themselves, say how they found us, how long they're staying. Then the different teams report on what they did that day. Now the teams reporting talks honestly about the goods and bads of what got done that day and what failed, what worked. Basically what we're doing in corporate speak is we're now doing an orientation for new staff. But they're hearing the stories of real people doing real work, and so it's not boring and they stay intellectually engaged. At the end of the meeting, the director of the project will talk about what we're going to do the next day, and then people basically choose what they're going to do. The all-hands meeting is one of our vehicles for encouraging total transparency. Transparency of our finances, transparency of our decisions. I can still remember standing up, because I was running the meeting this particular night in Biloxi, and one of our volunteers, a nice young blonde woman, stood up and said, David, we're doing all this hard work, cut chainsaws, and she said, you know, the animal shelters really got affected too, and there's a lot of animals that have problems. I think we should help the animal shelters. And in my mind, the back of my mind was saying, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. But the front of my mind was saying, okay, it's a volunteer, and you have to be responsive to the volunteers. So it's like, okay, Helen, that's an interesting idea. What does anybody else think? And a bunch of other people thought it was a great idea. So it was like, well, why don't we try that tomorrow? And 3 people went to the animal shelter the next day and came back, and of course, you know, more than half the people had left and dumped their animals. So the animal shelter has twice as many animals as they can handle, and 1/3 of the staff. And so they really had tremendous demands. And it became one of our favorite projects, such that after a while in Biloxi, we actually had a kennel out back in the grass where the pups who weren't going to make it to the next day made it to the hands-on kennel and survived. One of those, believe it or not, actually flying back with President Bush on his second trip to us, and at least for a while.
Before you touch this,
yeah.
This is totally unasked for. I didn't have any idea this picture was in there. Notice the guy standing up talking in that right now.
That ugly bald?
That ugly bald guy in the back, that's me.
Oh, cool.
And
that's Mike Mead in the left.
And the guy, I don't know if you can see, the front row, the second table in is Sean Lynch, who is also a Bonaventure student who was there.
Mike Mead, the guy in the red shirt, is from Springville. He gave us the skid steer and helped us buy it. Yes. I guess he gave it to us, I think. So, yeah, real close connection.
Yeah.
The all-hands meeting is a management device that also allows us, if you think of it as a company, to run the company 1 day at a time. That is, if someone's only going to be there for 1 day, they can learn what to do the next day in that evening meeting. That allows us to say to people, you can come and stay for a week or 100 days, because we'll run the business 1 day at a time, and gives us sort of an inherent flexibility. This is Darius, and this is Mark. Mark came for 2 weeks in September of 2005, and he's now in Haiti, leading our project in Haiti. So he's never left hands-on since since he came. That particular picture was interesting for those of you who were in the Gulf Coast, that the city of Biloxi uses a lighthouse as the symbol of the city, and that little token is their city key to the city. Only one survived Katrina, and in our last night closing ceremony, the city of Biloxi presented the only surviving key to the city to Hands On USA. Their message that night was, when you came and gutted our houses, you ripped out despair and you gave us hope. And so those of you who think about helping out after a disaster, what you're bringing people is hope, that they can start the next step, that for some reason the world dealt them a short stick, but somebody cares enough to come and help, and it has a tremendous psychological impact that you're saying, I know you had a problem, I care about it, and physically I'm also going to do something to help you. The combination of those three things makes a big deal. As you know, the whole volunteer experience, the Bonner Response, hands-on, thousands of people from across the country. The Sun Herald actually got the Pulitzer Prize for reporting for the year of 2005, and this was the front page of their January 1 edition, thanking the volunteers from all across the country that came to help. Our success in Biloxi led us to believe that maybe this model had legs. And so I got two of my guys and said, will you consider doing this for the next year? And so we had enough money to fund them for a year. Our next projects were, that's summer, now we're into '06. And we decided, we had the project in Thailand, the project in Biloxi. And if you think about a mindset, those are the two largest disasters to hit the world, and they happened within about 8 months of each other. Frankly, I thought we were going to be in a different expectation rate of major disasters, which fortunately hasn't really happened. But the next one that happened was an earthquake in Indonesia, so we decided that we would, could do that. So we launched a project, that's the volcano. Our earthquakes have a particular, each disaster has its own particular pattern of destruction and set of tasks you're going to be expected to do. But there's always rubble to be removed to allow people to get to the next step in their life. And so people in places like Indonesia save everything, and so where in the States, a bulldozer would come and knock over a building, in places like Indonesia, you take the boards and the nails and save the full bricks and the half bricks, because everything's going to be used in the reconstruction, and that's the guy whose houses we were working on. What's different in these areas is that we're really living in the village. So Indonesia, as you know, is the largest Muslim country in the world, and we were living in a Muslim village. So how many of you, I could say, have ever lived in a Muslim village? That would be putting it a bit too hard, although maybe there's some. How many people have ever been in Asia? So, hands-on creates an opportunity for you to be in places in a safe way that you wouldn't be otherwise. And if you think about travel, I would suggest, think of 3 different levels, because you all know people who've traveled. And you can travel to Indonesia or China, and you can stay at Western hotels and say, I traveled to China. You can stay and travel in local hotels and say, I've traveled to China or Indonesia. Or you can live in a village. And they are as dramatically different from each other as not traveling at all. And going to a country and living in the village and eating the local food cooked by the local people and starting to learn their language and having kids high-five you and know your name, I would suggest is a totally different way to start to understand another culture, and one that I would recommend. We always find, like, these kids, it looks like fun and games, but these kids their school was destroyed, so they're in school in a tent. Well, being in a tent in Indonesia is not an easy way for kids to be, and so one of the things that we'll often do on a project, it gives our volunteers a day off from physical labor, is spend time with the kids. Everybody wants to know some English. Everybody's interested in seeing someone different, and so interacting with kids in schools, even if it's teaching them games or songs, is an example of the kind of stuff we'll do. And this is Mark with the kids in Indonesia, and you learn about things. There's so much to learn, and I hope you're taking advantage of the opportunity here. It almost seems to me we go through a period of life where you're expected to learn things not knowing why, and then you go out and wish you had had time to learn things when you're out there trying to figure them out. So in Indonesia, the economic system is people have to pay even for rudimentary education. The education may appear to be free, but the family may have to pay $5 a month, whether for uniforms or books. These are places where people literally do earn $1 or $2 a day. You know, $500 a year is an income in Indonesia or Haiti. And so the decision to have a kid in school or not is a major economic decision for that family. So these families have made a decision to invest in their kids. After Indonesia, the next project was when a major cyclone, Sitter, hit the Philippines. And so we tried a project in the Philippines. This is Mark, who's now our International Ops Director. Darius, the woman on the far left for you is Stephanie. Stephanie came as a volunteer. She's now our project director in Haiti. So she was a UC Berkeley graduate who just, you know, became a volunteer for several projects. I'll move through these because what happened in the Philippines is that volcanoes had built up hundreds of feet. I mean, think of 3 times this level of ash on the side of the mountains. But then it got saturated by a series of storms and finally got hit by a cyclone that drove the sodden ash off the volcanoes into the communities and destroyed schools and homes. And yeah, it was a significant event. This was a school we ended up cleaning, painting, and putting a new roof on it. This is a typical school in places like Indonesia or the Philippines. It's a simple 2- or 3-room concrete structure, cinder block walls like this with a galvanized iron roof. So when someone says we built a school, it's not like building a building here. It's a simpler, more direct, and frankly easier for volunteers to manage. These are just the kids that were helping us in the Philippines. And we went looking for the fishing boats again in the Philippines and found in this area that we found a village, a fishing-based village where all the boats were destroyed. But because of the different conditions, they used very small and simple fishing boats. So we organized, in this case, the 21 fishermen that lost their boats, got them to create a team, got them to agree to work. They could make 5 boats a week. We provided the materials. They worked for the next month building boats, and then we had a launching ceremony. And we, again, put a village back in business with a few $1,000s worth of materials, but really, I would say, without being offensive, a Western style of project organization management and a small amount of very focused dollars, a couple $1,000s. But again, put 21 families back in business. And this was the school we opened at the end, and I sort of like the flower decoration with the hands-on symbol when we finished up in Manila. This was down in Peru. This is Bill Driscoll, who came down to Mississippi from Boston College and then stayed with Persevere. Some of you might have worked with Bill down in Pass Christian or Bay St. Louis. He became our domestic ops director. This was one of our major donors. We try to get our donors to come on trips, but we don't. This guy came down and actually worked and was productive and became enthusiastic. Peru was an earthquake in Pisco, and we had experience with earthquakes. We announced the Peru project pretty widely and got 560 volunteers to come to Peru. Again, our model is pretty simple. You pay your own way to get there. We give you food and housing for free. We'll organize tools and transportation, and then we'll have just enough management to organize work and the logistics to apply people against the work. This was our operation in Bangladesh. So when we go to a place like Bangladesh, I went to Bangladesh on the assessment team, as did Mark, Steph, and a young man named John. Our approach is fairly simple and consistent, and it follows maybe 3 steps. The first step is you go into the capital city. Capital city of Bangladesh is Dhaka, because in the capital city is where you're going to have the government ministries for things like education and health, and the UN's coordination body is going to be there because at a national level we need to gather data about what's the actual damage all across the country. So if you're into statistics or math or finance or management or psychology, you can see how any one of them could be relevant to trying to gather information that quickly has to be turned into what do I do next. I go to those meetings primarily. I look at number of schools destroyed because my sense is that's the kind of data that one can capture realistically. Deaths, candidly, don't have any impact on what we decide to do because we're not going to change that. Homes destroyed or damaged is a tough statistic to get accurately. Schools destroyed is pretty good. What that will do is allow us to go from a country down to a region. We'll then go down into the regional capital in Bangladesh, it was Borashal. We'll base there for a few days and do day trips out to the most severely affected areas where we're trying to make 2 decisions. One, are we going to do a project in this country? And once we make a yes decision, then it's where. And the where will be based on, is there a concentration of damage so that we can take a team of volunteers in and they can be effective with minimum travel time? And is there a place we can house the volunteers? So we went to 12 different communities in Bangladesh where literally you walk down the street with the mayor or the local community leader and look and say, wow, this is a shame, sorry, you don't have enough damage. Hop back in your SUV and drive to the next place. Because you've got to find a concentration of damage that you have to be able to estimate. How many people will come? If I have 25 volunteers for 4 months, is there enough work here for that set of people? This is sort of what Bangladesh looks like. If you get a supply of wood, for example, to build something in Bangladesh, this is what the wood looks like. So it's sort of exciting to think about trying to build a house. If you're trying to build a boat, this wood might be okay if you can fit it properly. What we were doing in this case is building a school. So all this construction of the building was done by a team of volunteers, some semiconductor engineer from Ireland, a hydrologist from New Zealand who figured, okay, we know enough math, we can figure out how to build trusses and build a school. And when you have a little more time on a project, and you guys on the bottom respond, we're there for a week, we're there for a few months, you can organize a team with a few critical professional skills and wrap everyone else around it and create something dramatic out of it. And this is the construction of a building like that. Just again, the kids at the school, local scenes. It's one of our New Zealand volunteers in the blue. And what's really sort of funny, if you think about taking Western women into a Muslim village in Bangladesh. Number one, in this village, they've never seen a Westerner, let alone a Western woman, let alone a Western woman doing construction. So you're changing perceptions in 100 different ways. And over a short period of time, our volunteers felt more comfortable in native dress, literally for the physical comfort of being in it when it was working, and then would wear it naturally. And this is where we buy our food, in the market, down the street. My only point is, it's a readily accessible, totally different lifestyle than you might get if you consider traveling in some other way. Obviously, I think it works pretty well. Some of these are in here just because they're pretty shots. But this is the village where we lived for 5 months in Bangladesh. It was challenging in a way to get there. You fly through London to get to Dhaka. From Dhaka down to the ferry docks is about a 3-hour trip. And then from the ferry boat, it's a 20-hour trip to the project. So it's a not insignificant challenge, but it's also a very manageable one if you plan your time. Bangladesh had 3 characteristics that endeared us to it. It was the most densely populated country in the world. It's the piece that was parsed off India, where the Muslim population of India was parsed off. To the right side is Bangladesh, and to the left side became Pakistan. So that's how Bangladesh initially came into existence as East Pakistan coupled with West Pakistan, but then separated. So it's got about 160 million people. It's a very, very large country. It's the most densely populated per square mile. It's the poorest country in the world, and it's always been in the top 5 and most corrupt. So poor, intense, corrupt sounds like a good place to do a project. So this is the village, Rayanda, that we lived in. But everywhere you go, people have hope. They haven't changed. I like them to see our world, if you will, the Western world, as a different phenomenon that has so much to bring to people. And you guys are entering into one of the most exciting times in the world, where globalization is allowing you to see people in every part of the world, to have a sensitivity to religions in every part of the world, and those people to want to see who we are. We being the West, we being America, we being you guys. When I spend time on our project, 75% of our volunteers are under 30. And to me, it gives me a tremendous sense of confidence and excitement, because I see people having a broader worldview, and I see people demanding of their careers some blend of what is the right thing to do, what do I want to do with the world, how do I want to decide my own life. And I just would, as strongly as I can, recommend to you that you form your own opinions. You find right now sources of information that you trust. That when you read the paper, you don't just read the paper, you look at the name of the reporter, and over time decide whether you trust Tom Friedman more than you trust Maureen Dowd. That when you read a book, you read it skeptically, that you don't accept the written word, that you don't go to a party and repeat something that you read on the basis that it must be true, because if someone's going to attribute it to you, you want to have it have gone through the processing part of your mind to say, this guy said this, I'm not so sure, or I'm sure it's wrong, or I know I disagree. If you need a source, I mean, as an example, there's an online site, which you may have heard of, it's just a starting point, but it's called the Drudge Report. By itself, it's not much, but it's like a Craigslist front page, and you can click on every opinion writer. So you can go to Ann Coulter, followed by Friedman, followed by whoever you want, and you can go and look at 10 conversations on the same topic, like the stimulus bill, and then form your own opinion, which I think is a skill, a strength that would be useful to develop now and carry with you for the next 50 years. One other thing that came out is a sort of a now skill is when I needed to fund hands-on to carry it from the post-Biloxi, post-Indonesia into the next few years, I went out to my circle of friends and said, this is a good thing, will you help me? And I would almost ask you or challenge you, who are the friends that you might turn to in 5, 10, 20 years if you have something you believe in? Who would you want to trust to give you advice, give you opinions? Who would you answer if they called you? Because those friendships and the skill at selecting them and developing them is something you can do as effectively right now as you can in 5, 10, or 20 years. And that network of trust, frankly, you can never get it back if you lose it. But if you have it, it's currency you can exchange if you find an idea that you think is important in the world. I recommend you protect it. This is sort of Mark doing an all-hands meeting at the end of the day in the project. This one probably in the Philippines. I guess that's all I got. I've got more slides on Haiti, but they're in the, they're in my laptop, which fortunately has a Mac, and God knows they're banned from campus, I guess. So let me just sort of move toward taking some Q&A. I'll wrap. We left the Philippines and did Iowa. You guys came out and helped us in Iowa, where a few thousand homes were destroyed. We went from Iowa to Haiti, which is, as you probably know, the country that was created by a revolution of slaves. So it was the first black-led democracy in the world, and certainly, obviously, then in the Western Hemisphere. It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It's had a series of government failures. So it's a challenged country, but one that has great needs. And we've had a very successful project there, including, unusually so for us, a very strong local volunteer presence, where we've got a group of about 25 Haitian, basically young men, who work as volunteers, on average about 10 to 15 a day. And so organizing and managing that resource has been an interesting and challenging development. Our website, as you probably know, is HODR.org, hands-on-disaster-response.org. But we've got video clips of our volunteers from Haiti being interviewed on ABC Nightly News. We've got a video clip of one of our volunteers from Iowa that was on NBC Nightly News. We were on NPR in December. Actually, we've got some magazine articles. So we've gotten decent coverage. Fundraising still a challenge. Managing the business still a challenge. Growing the business still a challenge. So we're a 3-year-old mini experiment in how to help people respond to natural disasters. I would suggest that the experience of Hands-On, which may look to Jim and Bono Responds as a huge organization, is we're a tiny, skinny, I don't think we're stupid, but we're not smart yet, organization. And I would suggest that any one of you could start an organization just like it. What you need is, see a problem, figure out what you think is a reasonable solution, put it together and try it. There's not much going at risk, and it's a tremendous education to give it a shot. Why don't we take some questions and see if you guys have anything on your mind? Sure. Yep.
Professor Mahar mentioned that you've attempted to volunteer in some countries and they necessarily didn't want your help. Can you explain that?
Yeah, China was the principal example. After the earthquake in China, we sent an assessment team. Our sequence of activities is we send an assessment team of usually 3 people plus or minus 1. They take about 2 to 4 weeks to figure out where we're going to locate and then do the place. So after the earthquake in China, we sent a team, went down to Chengdu. And what happened, the Chinese government obviously is closely controlled government. There was tremendous destruction around the Chengdu earthquake. We saw a phenomenal need for our people. There were military guards preventing access into many of the areas. It happens that the area in which the Chengdu earthquake hit is also the site of several Chinese Army defense research establishments, so there's nuclear research effectively going on in that broad area. But I think more importantly, what we work is at a community level or maybe one level up. And the people at that level were afraid that accepting our help would be a negative opinion of whether the government was going to be able to take care of the problem. And we would get close to someone saying, please help us move this mountain of debris, but we never had anyone comfortable enough to go forward, and we were never able to get government approval to bring in international volunteers. Myanmar was a similar situation, and Myanmar was really even worse because it's a blatant military dictatorship, and initially they wouldn't let any NGOs into the country at all. Eventually they let some into the capital city, Rangoon, but then they would only let nationals, Myanmarese or Burmese, depending on whether you're Myanmar or the West, let the national employees go out into the countryside, because the countries that want to control information don't want people from the outside in the countryside seeing the reality. And an example of the reality in Chengdu would be a farming village of 100+ families that had the farmland around the village. The government decided to take all the farmland, build 6,000 housing units on it, move all the farmers into an apartment building, and basically created a living commune for 6,000 people whose homes had been destroyed in another city. So within 45 days of the earthquake, that decision was taken, and those homes were just built on what had been for centuries, land that had been farmed by those families. I think the government just didn't want the impact of those decisions to be seen. It's the only place we've been in the country and came out without doing a project because of obstruction from the government. Sorry.
Notice you've been doing this for a few years, and with the benefit of hindsight, how would you have reorganized, or how would you have originally altered your organization now that you know what you do in terms of strategy and so forth?
So I guess I'd say I don't know if I would have done it, but that's probably not true. I think our relationships with other organizations were two things, and as you make me think about it. We had a tremendous impact in Biloxi, Mississippi, and had a strong volunteer base and a lot of enthusiasm about what we were doing. And then because we follow a model that is get in early and leave after about 4 months. That's our hands-on model is to have a major impact in that most chaotic period of time. Because we pulled out of Mississippi in February of 2006 and didn't have another project in the U.S. until the summer of 2008, we lost the momentum and institutional enthusiasm that our 1,500 Biloxi volunteers had. One thing I learned, for example, is that email addresses decay at a relatively rapid rate. Obviously, when you have lots of college students as volunteers, pretty naturally, their emails change. But everybody, normal, quote, other people's email addresses decay also. We should have had domestic projects just to keep the enthusiasm on the domestic side. That was a mistake. The second, we sort of pride ourselves on our freewheeling nature on international projects. But in fact, I think we can be more productive if we investigate some level of peering relationship with other larger, more structured organizations. For example, in Haiti, there's a group called Catholic Relief Services. CRS is one of the set of very large NGOs, non-governmental organizations. I believe we can have more impact helping them be more effective in some ways than just trying to do it all on our own. The second thing is that large NGOs, and in that category would be names you might have heard of, Oxfam, CARE, UNICEF, CRS, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, are to some extent sort of surprisingly, government contractors. That is, if you look at all the development assistance in the world, not just disaster assistance, there's about $100 billion a year spent on development assistance. It comes about $40 billion from the US government, out of the whole world, about $30 billion from all other governments, and about $30 billion from individuals. That means that if CRS is in Haiti, a substantial part of their funding is coming from something called USAID, the US Agency for International Development. So it's when the US decides to help a country like Peru or Haiti, they do it by moving funds to AID. AID then finds entities that they can contract with to help out in local areas. The AID, Agency for International Development's initial tests are a series of questions, which I think are sensible to an NGO. So compare me to CRS. They would say, are you currently in the country? Are you currently in Haiti? How long have you been there? We say no. CRS says we've been here 40 years. Do you have working partnerships with anybody in Haiti, like a local organization? We say no. They say yes. Here's the 10 different organizations. So it's harder for me to participate in terms of in that flow of funds that might help than it is for a CRS. What we're doing in Haiti today, literally today, is working on projects in partnership with Oxfam, CRS, and UNICEF, partly in anticipation that on future disasters, we may go to them and say, do you remember in Haiti how we did that well reclamation project for you? We'll do it again on this new project. Include us for $25,000 in your application to AID. And so I think maturing our relationship, including as a possible funding source, through AID or the European Commission, which would be the other major source, with entities, the major NGOs, and having them realize that our flexibility can make them more effective, may create a more stable fundraising base. So I guess both my answers tie back into fundraising in a way. If I had stayed closer to my domestic beneficiaries and volunteers, I would have been able to keep a better fundraising base from them, and I let that decay over a few years. And on the international side, to participate in the funding flow, I think I either have to get big enough to participate directly, or I have to have a closer, pre-arranged MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with other NGOs so that we can do the work we want to do, but at the same time receive some funding for it. So a lot of it in a small organization like this has to do with anticipating what are your expenses and what are your sources of funding, and are you going to be sort of delighting your funding sources? That is, when you get done, can you go back to someone and say, I used your $1,000 in this way, and it should be the most effective money you spent. I'm doing a fundraiser in Buffalo tomorrow night. Anybody you want to send your rich uncle to it, it's at the Buffalo Club at 5:30. Or you can come if you're rich yourself. But anyway, the message will be, in these sort of hard times of an economic crisis, give less, do more. If you feel you have to cut back on what you can give to organizations, make sure you're giving it to somewhere where it's used in a hyper-effective way. And I think we're hyper-effective.
What are your future plans for hands-on, and how far ahead do you look from the plan?
Yeah, I had a great plan for this year until the recession, because we're privately funded, and we're finding that our funding sources have dried by about 40%. I've had to cut back on what our plans were. So my plans for hands-on are as follows. So we now have a domestic operations director and an international operations director. You may know these guys. Bill Driscoll, formerly of Boston College, is our domestic, and Mark Young is our international. We're experimenting in Haiti with a management level of project director on the basis that we could have 2 or 3 project directors work under one international operations director. By the same token, we have our first domestic to-be project director currently in Haiti. And as we grow the number of project directors, we'll reach the point where we'll have continuity of projects. That is, that we'll always have a project going on. My objective, and I might get there in 3 years or so, would be as follows: to have 4 international operations, 4 operations directors, 1 each for Asia, Africa, Latin, South America, and domestic. Each of those operations directors able to have 2 or 3 project directors, so that in each of those 4 geographic areas, we always had a project going on, so that people like Bonaventure Responds on a spring break, or a corporation sending down a team, could plan on the fact that we would have a project to send people to in each of those 4 major areas of the world. Probably the recession will force me to defer those plans by 12 months, maybe 24 months, we'll see. I want to survive across this year. But to my mind, that's where I'd like to get, because I think this model of easy volunteering is a great thing. I think it's great for the volunteer and great for the community, and I'd like to allow us to grow into that model. And the only thing that will prevent us from going into it is funding, because the natural flow of volunteers, like the 100, or pick a steady state. In Haiti, we've had an average of steady state of about 40 people. Of those 40 people, 10 of them could become project directors. 5 of them would like to be. So our model gives us lots of talent, lots of people to pick from if we had enough funding to allow them to go on. So my challenge is to try to get enough funding in place over the next 3 years so we can take advantage and create that continuity of opportunity, which I think is important for us.
Have you found, due to the recent economic problems, have you found there's been an uptick in volunteering?
Not yet, but you know, we did Iowa, and we had a huge turnout in Iowa, but that was in the summer, and it was more of a help your neighbor kind of thing. So we had 500 people come into Iowa from outside, and 1,600 from inside Iowa help out, including a couple of corporations help a lot. Haiti's just too daunting a place for a test, but I think if we had an easier international test like Peru or Bolivia or Chile or something, or we had a major domestic, then I think we'd see a strong response from people who had time and wanted the opportunity to learn what you learn on one of these projects. So I don't think we've had a fair test yet, but I can't say, you know, that I've seen it. I think we were too early in Iowa, and I think Haiti's too tough a challenge. Maybe a little bit in Haiti, and that we've got some people who are there that weren't employed, and they're saying, I might as well stay here for another month or 2. I mean, again, our model is you don't pay to be there, so once you're there, once you've paid for the airfare, extending a month does not have an economic decision. It sort of brings to mind one of the other sort of philosophic issues that I would suggest to you that I've learned from hands-on, which has to do with like how much money you need to earn, which may be of interest to some of you. And I found when I would talk to people at our projects, and I'll use as an example a young man named Kevin Diggett, who's been with us. He's right now in Haiti. He was with us down in Biloxi. Kevin was a contract worker in New York City who had a good income. He earned about $60,000 a year, but he didn't enjoy what he was doing. And so he would work with us, then he would go back and work for 6 months. He would come back and work with us again. He would work a little longer, then a little longer. And he found, again, when he was in our projects, he was sort of cash flow neutral. So as long as he didn't commit to big fixed expenses like an apartment or car payments, then he could stretch out his time on project. And I think of it as 2 rheostats, you know, 2 dials you can turn. And most people go out, many people go out, and turn the dial of income up as high as they can, and then are surprised that the expense dial goes up just as far and just as fast. And that they're living, what I would say is, quote, cash neutral. That is, whatever they're earning, they're spending. And they find themselves doing something they don't really want to be doing. So if you're going to be cash flow neutral, you could be cash flow neutral at 0 and 0, or 30 and 30, or 60 and 60. Just be very careful about deciding how you value things in your life in terms of who you're working with, what's the purpose you're working for, what do you really need? Is it worth doing something you don't want to do so you can have something that, in fact, you really don't need? And I think my experience of spending hundreds of hours with people on our projects is that it's possible to be very savvy after a period of time with turning down that expense dial and saying a job that's really satisfying at 20 grand can be much better than a less satisfying job at 40 if it really allows me to do something that I think is important. Because if you're doing something that you believe is important, then it has a sense of purpose, and it feels to me like that's a more useful way to spend your time. So I would encourage you to make sure you realize you can turn both those dials.
How, if you talk about that balancing, how difficult has it been for your organization to adapt when you go from area to area to adopt controls so that, you know, those decisions are being made in
Well,
a quick standpoint and you're controlling those expenses as you should be?
well, one of the things, and I would suggest this when people are going out into the world for employment too, it's in a time where it's tough to get a job, any job will seem like a great job, I suppose. Our model is we're a small organization, and our organization is able to work on an extraordinary level of trust of the person in the field. So I only have, the people I have in the field have my absolute trust, and I give them basically total financial decision making. They know that I will look at it, but it's really an after the fact. So in the project like Haiti, for example, we'll spend $160,000. That's what it will cost us to run Haiti for about 6 months. About a third of that cost is my international ops director, my project director, and one coordinator, and their travel in and out. That's 1/3. About another third is hiring local people to cook, do the laundry for all the volunteers for about 6 months. And the other third is buying tools and local transportation to take people out. Now, for example, in Haiti, to compensate for the fact that it's a dangerous environment, when you go to Haiti, you fly into the capital city, which is called Port-au-Prince. Our project is about 3.5 hours away. Port-au-Prince is a dangerous city, 250 kidnappings last year. So we have someone meet people at the airport, take them to a secure housing for their nights in Port-au-Prince, and we run a secure shuttle 2 days a month going up to Gonaïves, 2 days a week going up to Gonaïves, 2 days a week coming back. That shuttle costs us $6,000 a month. That'll be $30,000 out of our $160,000 will be spent on that transportation decision. That's probably the only decision I talked about with Steph and Mark in terms of is that necessary and do we have to do it for the whole project. Now, so if you're in a small organization and the word trust exists, then that's one way to control expenses, I think. My view, if you have the choice and you're going to work in an organization, to the extent you can identify the management of an organization, whether it be a business, a Bonaventure Responds or hands-on, a university, or a corporation, is the very tough test is, do you admire the management? If you admire the management of an organization, you can live with any decision. If you disrespect the management of an organization, it's very hard to live with almost any decision. And I find the angst level of people is if they're in an organization that they respect, then they give the management the benefit of the doubt. And I find if you want to minimize angst in your life, work for organizations where if you can match the purpose of the organization with something you care about and you can admire the management, then you're going to have that's going to be a good place to live. Because part of the thing about a place to work is it's the place you're going to live half your, awake life for that next year or two. And you just don't want to pick a miserable place to live if you have a choice. And the first thing is get a job. Second thing is get a choice. And when you get a choice, pick a place that you think matches up with purpose and management that you appreciate.
We're cutting off.
Okay, thanks.
But thank you. One final thing. As you can see, I have lots of attire, from all the different projects I've been at. I have in fact, underneath I have another Cedar Rapids one. But you don't have anything from Bonaventure Responds one. So
that's cool.
A Bonaventure Responds t-shirt for you. There you go.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
All right, thanks for coming. Just as a commercial, for those of you who haven't been involved with Bonaventure Responds, we do things locally almost every weekend. We have a big local day in Buffalo, March 28th. We have another 3-day event, April 24th, 25th, and 26th, so please get involved. And if you're in my class, we have another one at 1:30. So, thank you.